Melania Trump had just declared, "Our marriage is based on true love." But the contract in Jasmine Crockett's hand proved that Melania had secured a $50 million pre-marriage guarantee from Trump, plus $25 million additional payment per child. 37 seconds later, America would see the true face of its most famous marriage. The House Select Committee hearing on presidential family financial disclosures had been scheduled as routine oversight, the kind of procedural examination that generates little public interest and even less media coverage. Melania Trump had agreed to testify voluntarily, her first public appearance before Congress, positioning herself as a devoted wife and mother whose only concern was protecting her family's privacy. For the first hour, it had proceeded exactly as her legal team had orchestrated. Melania had delivered carefully rehearsed testimony about her love for America, her dedication to her family, and her commitment to serving as an exemplary First Lady during her husband's previous term and potential future presidency. "I came to this country with a dream," she had told the committee, her accented English carrying what appeared to be genuine emotion. "I worked hard, I followed the rules, and I met the man who would become not just my husband, but my partner in life and love." The Republican members had nodded approvingly during her testimony. Even Democratic members who disagreed with Trump family politics recognized the compelling narrative of an immigrant who had achieved the American dream through hard work and determination. "People often ask me about my marriage," Melania continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "They want to know if it's real, if our love is genuine, if I married Donald for the right reasons." She paused for effect, her media training evident in every gesture. "I want to be absolutely clear about this. Our marriage is based on true love. Donald and I share a deep commitment to each other and to our family that goes far beyond any material considerations." The applause from the Republican side was immediate and enthusiastic. This was exactly the kind of humanizing testimony that could help rehabilitate the Trump family's image ahead of the upcoming election. "Money has never been a factor in our relationship," Melania concluded, her voice ringing with conviction. "We married for love, we stay together for love, and we will continue to build our future together based on the same foundation of genuine affection and mutual respect that brought us together." The cameras captured her perfectly poised, elegant, seemingly sincere in her devotion to both her husband and her country. It was a masterful performance that would have dominated positive news cycles for weeks. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't applauding. She was studying a leather portfolio that had been delivered to her office that morning by a courier who had identified themselves only as someone who believes in truth over fairy tales. The portfolio contained documents that painted a very different picture of the Trump marriage. "Mrs. Trump," Jasmine said, her voice cutting through the settling applause with clinical precision, "I appreciate your touching testimony about love and commitment." Melania's smile flickered slightly but held. She had expected some Democratic skepticism. It was part of the political theater. "Thank you, Congresswoman. I have some questions about the legal arrangements that preceded your marriage to Donald Trump." The room tensed. Legal arrangements weren't typically discussed in congressional hearings about family finances, and the specificity of Jasmine's language suggested this wasn't going to be a routine line of questioning. Melania's media training kicked in immediately. "I'm not sure what you mean by legal arrangements. Donald and I married for love, as I explained." "Of course," Jasmine replied, her tone maddeningly neutral. "But before that marriage took place, there were extensive legal negotiations between your representatives and Mr. Trump's legal team, weren't there?" The question was dangerous because it was technically accurate. Every high-profile marriage involved prenuptial agreements and financial discussions. But something in Jasmine's tone suggested she had specific knowledge rather than general assumptions. Melania tried to maintain her composure, but a note of defensiveness crept into her voice. "Like many couples, we had legal consultations about practical matters. That's normal and responsible." "Practical matters," Jasmine repeated, opening her portfolio and lifting out the first document. "Is that what you would call a 47-page contract detailing financial obligations, performance requirements, and penalty clauses for your marriage?" The document appeared on the committee room's main screen, an official legal contract with both Trump and Melania's signatures clearly visible at the bottom. The title at the top was devastating in its clinical language: Marital Performance and Financial Security Agreement. Melania's face went very still. This wasn't a standard prenuptial agreement that every wealthy couple signed. This was something far more detailed, far more transactional, far more damaging to the romantic narrative she had just spent an hour constructing. Mrs. Trump, Jasmine continued, reading from the contract, according to this agreement dated 6 months before your wedding, you negotiated a guaranteed payment of $50 million to be transferred to accounts under your sole control within 30 days of the marriage ceremony. The number hit the hearing room like a physical blow. $50 million wasn't a wedding gift or a generous prenuptial settlement. It was payment for services to be rendered. Melania's mouth opened, then closed. The confident woman who had spent an hour talking about love and partnership was suddenly confronted with documented evidence that her marriage had begun as a business transaction. That's taken out of context, she managed, falling back on standard political deflection. You don't understand the full circumstances. Let me help you with the context, Jasmine interrupted, turning to another page of the contract. Section 4.2 states, upon successful completion of the marriage ceremony and associated public relations requirements, the wife shall receive immediate compensation of $50 million as specified in Addendum C. She paused, letting the language sink in before continuing. Section 4.3 adds, additional compensation of $25 million shall be provided for each child produced during the marriage, with payments structured according to the timeline specified in Addendum D. The clinical language was devastating. This wasn't a marriage contract. It was an employment agreement with reproductive bonuses. Melania hadn't married for love. She had negotiated a multi-million-dollar compensation package for playing the role of Trump's wife. Furthermore, Jasmine continued relentlessly, Section 7.1 outlines performance standards for public appearances, social obligations, and media engagement, with specific penalties for failure to meet contractual obligations. The Republican members were frantically whispering among themselves, trying to figure out how to defend what appeared to be indefensible. The Democratic members were taking notes, recognizing that this was no longer routine oversight. It was the exposure of one of the most famous marriages in America as an elaborate financial arrangement. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She reached into her portfolio and withdrew what appeared to be banking documents that made Melania's eyes widen with recognition and terror. These, Jasmine said, holding up the documents, are wire transfer records from Deutsche Bank showing the $50 million payment referenced in your contract, transferred to Cayman Islands accounts under your control on January 15, 2005, exactly 30 days after your wedding. The banking records were impossible to deny or explain away. They showed the exact amount specified in the contract, transferred on the exact timeline the contract required, to offshore accounts that only Melania could access. The additional $25 million payment for your son Barron, Jasmine continued, was transferred on April 20, 2006, 30 days after his birth, exactly as specified in Section 4.3 of your marital contract. Each revelation hit like another nail in the coffin of the Trump marriage fairy tale. This wasn't love. It was a systematically structured business arrangement with performance requirements and financial incentives. Melania was now visibly struggling to maintain her composure. These are private financial matters that have been mischaracterized. Have they? Jasmine interrupted, reaching for another document. Because this email from your attorney to Trump's legal team, dated 2 weeks before your wedding, seems quite explicit about the nature of the arrangement. The email appeared on screen, and its content was devastating in its casual acknowledgement of the transactional nature of the upcoming marriage. Melania is pleased with the final terms negotiated. The $50 million base payment plus $25 million per child provides adequate compensation for the public role she'll be expected to play. The performance standards are reasonable and achievable. She's prepared to fulfill all contractual obligations for the agreed-upon compensation. The language was brutally clear. Melania hadn't been preparing for a marriage. She had been negotiating an employment contract with reproductive bonuses. But perhaps most damaging was the response from Trump's attorney. Donald is satisfied with the arrangement. The compensation is substantial but reasonable given the media value Melania will provide. The performance clauses ensure she'll maintain the public image necessary for his political and business objectives. The exchange revealed both parties treating the marriage as a business transaction, Trump purchasing a wife who would enhance his public image, Melania selling her services as a political and social prop for a predetermined price. The silence in the hearing room was profound and terrible. This wasn't just about financial disclosure. It was about the complete fabrication of one of America's most visible marriages. Melania tried desperately to salvage something from the wreckage. These documents are being misinterpreted. Every marriage involves financial planning. Mrs. Trump, Jasmine said, her voice carrying prosecutorial authority. Does every marriage involve performance bonuses? Does every marriage include penalty clauses for failure to fulfill public relations obligations? Does every marriage begin with a $50 million payment for services to be rendered? The questions were devastating because they were unanswerable. There was no way to characterize what the documents revealed as a normal marriage. But Jasmine had saved her most explosive revelation for last. She reached into her portfolio and withdrew what appeared to be a digital recording device that made Melania's face go completely white. This, Jasmine said, is a recording of a conversation between you and your attorney, Viktor Kozlov, dated 1 week before your wedding. Mr. Kozlov provided this recording to congressional investigators as part of his cooperation agreement with federal authorities. Audio recordings were political nuclear weapons, impossible to deny, impossible to spin, impossible to explain away through standard damage control techniques. Melania's hands were now visibly shaking. I have no idea what you think you have there, but any privileged conversations between attorney and client are not privileged when they involve discussion of potential criminal activity, Jasmine interrupted smoothly. Immigration fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to defraud the American people are not protected by attorney-client privilege. The implication was staggering. This wasn't just about a transactional marriage. It was about potential federal crimes related to how that transaction had been structured and concealed. Would you like to hear the recording, Mrs. Trump? Melania's mouth moved, but no sound came out initially. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. That recording would be out of context. You don't understand. Jasmine took the stammering response as reluctant consent and connected the device to the hearing room's sound system. The audio quality was excellent, professional legal recording equipment, not a hidden phone app. The first voice was clearly Viktor Kozlov's, speaking in accented English. Melania, I need to be very clear about the risks we're taking with this arrangement. Then came Melania's voice, unmistakable despite the phone compression. Victor, the money is too good to pass up. $50 million just for marrying him, plus $25 million for each child? I'd be crazy to say no. Kozlov's response carried clear concern. But the immigration implications are serious. If authorities discover that your marriage is essentially a business contract, it could void your citizenship and result in deportation. That's why we have to be smart about it, came Melania's voice through the speakers. The contract has to look like a prenup, but function like an employment agreement. Donald gets his trophy wife for public appearances. I get financial security. Everyone wins. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Melania and her attorney discussing how to structure the arrangement to avoid immigration scrutiny while maximizing her financial benefit. The most damaging exchange came near the end of the recording. What if people find out the marriage is fake? Kozlov asked. It's not fake, Melania replied. It's just financially motivated. I'll play the loving wife role as long as he keeps paying me. If he ever stops making the payments or tries to divorce me without the full settlement, I'll expose everything. Everything. The tax evasion, the Russian money, the Deutsche Bank loans, all of it. He needs me to maintain his image more than I need him. That gives me leverage. When the recording ended, the silence in the hearing room was absolute and devastating. Melania sat motionless, her carefully constructed public image crumbling in real time on national television. Jasmine spoke into the silence, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the chamber. Mrs. Trump, on this recording, you can be heard acknowledging that your marriage to Donald Trump is a financial arrangement rather than a romantic relationship. You also reference having knowledge of potential criminal activity, including tax evasion and suspicious foreign financial relationships. Melania found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. That recording is old and taken out of context. My feelings for Donald have evolved. Have they? Jasmine's voice cut through the excuse like a scalpel. Because according to these banking records, you've received additional payments totaling over $200 million during your marriage, all structured according to the performance clauses in your original contract. She held up another set of documents that made Melania's face go gray. Annual performance bonuses of $10 million for maintaining your public role. Special payments of $15 million for major political events like presidential campaigns. Emergency payments of $20 million during scandals to ensure your continued cooperation. Each revelation hit like another blow to the fairy tale marriage narrative. This wasn't love evolving over time. It was systematic financial manipulation designed to ensure Melania's continued participation in Trump's political theater. The most recent payment, Jasmine continued, was $50 million transferred to your accounts in December 2023 with the memo line, Testimony Preparation and Cooperation Agreement. The implication was clear and devastating. Even Melania's appearance before Congress had been financially negotiated, part of the ongoing business arrangement that had defined her relationship with Trump from the beginning. Mrs. Trump, Jasmine said, standing up to command the full attention of the room, you came here today and told us that your marriage is based on true love, that money has never been a factor in your relationship, that you and Donald Trump share genuine affection and mutual respect. Her voice carried the weight of moral judgment. But the evidence shows that your marriage is, and has always been, a business transaction. You were paid $50 million to marry Donald Trump. You've received hundreds of millions more to maintain the illusion of a loving relationship. You've been compensated for every child, every campaign, every public appearance. Melania remained silent because there was nothing she could say. How do you defend against your own voice on tape acknowledging the transactional nature of your marriage? How do you explain away contracts and banking records showing systematic payments for playing the role of loving wife? This isn't just about financial disclosure, Jasmine continued. This is about immigration fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to deceive the American people about the most visible marriage in American politics. She gathered her documents methodically, each movement final and decisive. You asked us to believe in your love story, Mrs. Trump. But what you've actually created is the most expensive performance art project in political history, a $250 million fraud designed to convince Americans that Donald Trump is capable of genuine human connection. The committee chairman called for a recess, but the damage was already done. Within minutes, the audio recording would be trending on every social platform. Within hours, immigration authorities would be reviewing Melania's citizenship status. Within days, both Trumps would be facing federal investigation for conspiracy and fraud. But the implications went far beyond one fake marriage. The systematic nature of the deception had exposed how easily the American people could be manipulated by carefully constructed narratives, even when those narratives were built on lies and sustained by criminal activity. As the hearing room emptied, Jasmine made one final statement for the cameras and the record. The American people deserve honesty from their political leaders and their families. They deserve to know when they're being sold a fairy tale instead of the truth. And they deserve leaders whose personal relationships are based on genuine human connection rather than financial transactions. She paused, her words carrying the weight of moral authority. Mrs. Trump didn't just deceive her husband about her motivations. She helped deceive an entire nation about the nature of their relationship. That's not immigration fraud or tax evasion. That's a betrayal of the trust that democracy requires. The scandal that followed was swift and comprehensive. Within 48 hours, every major news outlet had obtained copies of the marriage contract and banking records. Immigration attorneys filed formal complaints questioning Melania's citizenship based on marriage fraud. The IRS announced investigations into unreported income and potential tax evasion. Most devastating of all was the impact on Trump's political image. The man who had built his brand on being a successful dealmaker was revealed to have needed to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to convince a woman to pretend to love him. The powerful alpha male persona collapsed under the evidence that his most intimate relationship was just another business transaction. Melania initially tried to weather the storm, issuing statements through attorneys about mischaracterized financial arrangements and private family matters. But the audio recording was too clear, too detailed, too systematically damaging to be explained away through standard political spin. Within a week, facing potential deportation and criminal charges, Melania filed for divorce and began cooperating with federal investigators. The cooperation agreement she signed provided immunity from prosecution in exchange for testimony about Trump family financial crimes, tax evasion schemes, and foreign money laundering operations. The divorce filing included a detailed accounting of the payments she had received during the marriage, over $300 million in total compensation for playing the role of Trump's wife. The document read like a performance review rather than a dissolution of marriage, with itemized payments for specific public appearances, campaign events, and crisis management situations. I maintained the agreed-upon public persona for 18 years, Melania's filing stated. I fulfilled all contractual obligations including public appearances, social functions, and media interactions. I provided the political and social credibility that Mr. Trump required to maintain his public image and pursue political office. The clinical language was devastating in its honesty. After years of pretending to be a loving wife, Melania was finally acknowledging what everyone now knew, that she had been an employee rather than a spouse. The political ramifications were immediate and severe. Trump's approval ratings collapsed as Americans grappled with the reality that his marriage, held up as evidence of his personal success and attractiveness, had been an elaborate fraud sustained by hundreds of millions of dollars in payments. Conservative supporters who had defended the Trump family as exemplars of traditional marriage values found themselves unable to explain how a transaction-based relationship with performance bonuses represented their ideals. Religious leaders who had endorsed Trump despite personal scandals drew the line at a fake marriage designed to deceive voters about his character. The legal implications were equally severe. Federal prosecutors used Melania's cooperation to build cases against Trump for tax evasion, immigration fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. The marriage contract became evidence in a broader pattern of criminal behavior designed to manipulate public perception for political gain. But perhaps most significantly, the scandal had educated the American people about the intersection of money, image, and political power in ways that decades of media criticism had never achieved. People understood that the relationships they saw in political families might be as manufactured as any other aspect of campaign messaging. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a political psychology professor at Georgetown University, captured the broader implications in an analysis that became required reading in political science courses. The Melania-Trump marriage contract represents the complete commodification of personal relationships for political purposes, she wrote. When even the most intimate human connections become business transactions designed to manipulate voter perceptions, we've crossed a line that threatens the authenticity that democratic politics requires. The scandal became a turning point in how Americans evaluated their political leaders. Voters began demanding more transparency about family relationships, financial arrangements, and the authenticity of the personal narratives that candidates used to connect with the public. Marriage contracts between political figures and their spouses became subject to disclosure requirements. Financial arrangements within political families were scrutinized for evidence of deception or manipulation. The romantic narratives that had always been part of political storytelling were viewed with new skepticism. Law schools across the country began teaching the Melania Doctrine, the principle that systematic deception about personal relationships for political gain constituted fraud against the American people, even when no specific laws were violated. Professor Jennifer Williams at Harvard Law School made the case study required reading in her course on political ethics. The Trump marriage contract teaches us that authenticity isn't just a personal virtue, it's a democratic necessity, she told her students. When political leaders systematically deceive the public about their most basic human relationships, they undermine the trust that democratic governance requires. 2 years after the congressional hearing, Melania Trump published a memoir titled The Contract: My Life as a Political Performance Artist. The book provided unprecedented insight into the financial and emotional costs of living an entirely fabricated life for nearly 2 decades. I became very good at being someone I wasn't, she wrote in the introduction. I played the role of loving wife so convincingly that sometimes even I forgot it was a performance. But the payments never let me forget completely. Every month, the wire transfers reminded me that I was an employee, not a partner. The book became a bestseller not because of its political revelations, but because of its honest examination of what it meant to sell your authentic self for financial security. Readers were fascinated by the psychological cost of maintaining such an elaborate deception for so many years. The money was extraordinary, Melania wrote, but the price was my identity, my integrity, my ability to form genuine human connections. I became so practiced at performing love that I lost the ability to feel it authentically. The memoir sparked national conversations about authenticity, financial security, and the price of deception that went far beyond politics. Women's groups organized discussions about the choices available to immigrants seeking financial independence. Ethics professors assigned chapters in courses about moral philosophy and personal integrity. But the most significant impact was on political culture itself. The exposure of the Trump marriage as an elaborate financial arrangement had permanently altered how Americans viewed their political leaders' personal lives. Campaign events featuring happy political families were met with skepticism rather than admiration. Romantic origin stories told by political couples were fact-checked and investigated rather than accepted at face value. Financial arrangements within political families became subject to disclosure and scrutiny. The change was perhaps most visible during the following presidential campaign season, when candidates found themselves releasing unprecedented documentation about their marriages, family finances, and personal relationships to prove their authenticity to skeptical voters. The Melania standard, as it became known, required political figures to demonstrate that their personal relationships were genuine rather than transactional, that their family narratives were authentic rather than manufactured, that their most intimate connections represented real human bonds rather than political conveniences. Jasmine Crockett, who had triggered the transformation with 37 seconds of devastating questioning, reflected on the changes during a speech at the Women's National Democratic Club. The Melania Trump case wasn't just about exposing one fake marriage, she said to an audience that had lived through the transformation. It was about reclaiming authenticity in our political discourse, about demanding that our leaders be honest about their most fundamental human relationships. She concluded with words that had become a rallying cry for political transparency. Democracy requires trust, and trust requires truth. When political leaders lie about their most intimate relationships, they don't just betray their spouses, they betray everyone who believed their story was real. The audience applauded not just for the political victory, but for the broader cultural change that had resulted from holding powerful people accountable for their deceptions. 3 years after the hearing, both Donald and Melania Trump were serving federal prison sentences for conspiracy, fraud, and tax evasion. The marriage that had been fake from the beginning was finally, officially over. But the impact of their deception lived on in the reforms it had sparked, the skepticism it had generated, and the standards it had created for political authenticity. The 37 seconds that had begun with Melania's declaration of true love had ended with the complete exposure of the most expensive fake marriage in political history. Sometimes, that's all it takes to change how an entire society thinks about truth, authenticity, and the stories we tell ourselves about the people we choose to lead us. The greatest love story in American politics had been revealed as the greatest fraud. And in the end, that revelation had made American democracy stronger, more skeptical, and more demanding of the authentic human connections that effective leadership requires. But the story didn't end with the Trump convictions, or even with the cultural changes that followed. The exposure of the Melania marriage contract had opened a Pandora's box that revealed systematic deception across the entire landscape of American political families, triggering investigations and revelations that would reshape public understanding of power, money, and authenticity for generations to come. Within months of Melania's congressional testimony, investigative journalists had begun examining other high-profile political marriages with new skepticism and more sophisticated tools for detecting financial arrangements disguised as romantic relationships. The first major discovery came from an unexpected source: the divorce proceedings of Governor Marcus Wellington of Texas, whose wife had filed for dissolution of their 20-year marriage while demanding access to what she called performance payments she had received during his political career. Rebecca Wellington's divorce filing contained explosive allegations that mirrored the Trump arrangement. "Throughout our marriage, I received quarterly payments ranging from $100,000 to $500,000 for maintaining public appearances that supported my husband's political image. These payments were structured as household expenses and family investments to avoid tax implications." Her attorney provided documentation showing over $12 million in payments to Rebecca during Marcus Wellington's tenure as governor, with the amounts increasing significantly during election years and major political crises. Mrs. Wellington was essentially employed as the governor's wife. Her attorney explained at a press conference that was watched by millions of Americans still reeling from the Trump revelations. She was paid to attend events, make speeches, provide photo opportunities, and maintain the image of a happy political family. The Wellington case established a pattern that investigators would find repeated across the political spectrum. Wealthy politicians using systematic financial arrangements to secure the cooperation of spouses who might otherwise be unwilling to participate in the demands of public life. Senator Patricia Morrison of Colorado became the subject of federal investigation when her husband's business records revealed that he had received over $8 million in consulting fees from donors to his wife's campaigns. The consulting work appeared to consist entirely of accompanying Senator Morrison to political events and maintaining what investigators called the appearance of marital harmony. James Morrison had no expertise in political consulting. FBI Special Agent Sarah Chun explained to a Senate committee investigating the phenomenon. His only qualification was being married to Patricia Morrison. The payments were clearly compensation for playing the role of supportive political spouse. The Morrison investigation revealed sophisticated mechanisms for disguising spousal payments as legitimate business expenses. Consulting contracts, speaking fees, board positions, and investment opportunities were all used to transfer money from political donors to family members who provided image management services. But perhaps the most shocking discovery came from the archives of Blackstone Political Consulting, a firm that specialized in what industry insiders called family optimization services for political clients. When congressional investigators subpoenaed Blackstone's files, they uncovered what amounted to a catalog of transactional political relationships spanning 3 decades and involving dozens of prominent political figures from both parties. The Blackstone files contained detailed contracts for services that included spousal presentation management, comprehensive training and ongoing coaching for political spouses on public behavior, media interaction, and crisis response, family narrative development, creating and maintaining fictional backstories about how political couples met, fell in love, and built their relationships, relationship maintenance protocols, systematic scheduling of public displays of affection, romantic gestures, and intimate moments designed to convince voters of authentic connection, crisis relationship management, emergency services to maintain the appearance of marital stability during scandals, investigations, or personal difficulties. Dr. Michael Blackstone, the firm's founder, was compelled to testify before Congress about what investigators called the political marriage industrial complex. We recognize that modern American politics requires family narratives that voters can connect with emotionally, Blackstone explained, his usual corporate confidence replaced by defensive discomfort. Many of our clients had marriages that were professionally motivated. Our job was to help them present those relationships in ways that served their political objectives. "Are you saying you help politicians fake their marriages?" demanded Congressman Jamie Raskin. "We help them optimize their family presentations for maximum political impact," Blackstone replied carefully. Whether the underlying relationships were authentic or transactional wasn't our concern. Our job was messaging. The Blackstone testimony revealed the existence of what investigators called political marriage templates, standardized relationship narratives that could be applied to any couple regardless of their actual connection or compatibility. The high school sweethearts template created fictional stories about couples who had supposedly known each other since adolescence and maintained romantic connections through college and early careers. The professional partnership template focused on couples who had met through work, emphasizing shared ambitions and complementary skills while downplaying any financial arrangements. The rescue romance template portrayed one partner as having saved the other from difficult circumstances, creating narratives of gratitude and devotion that masked transactional relationships. "We had templates for every situation," Blackstone admitted under oath. Arranged marriages, financial arrangements, political alliances, business partnerships. Any relationship could be repackaged as a love story with the right narrative development and presentation coaching. The revelation that dozens of prominent political marriages were essentially professional arrangements created a crisis of faith in American political culture that went far beyond partisan divisions. Polls conducted in the aftermath of the Blackstone hearings showed that 73% of Americans believed that most political marriages are fake, while 68% said they had lost faith in the authenticity of political leaders' personal lives. The crisis deepened when former clients of Blackstone Political Consulting began coming forward voluntarily, either through criminal plea agreements or in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Congressman Robert Chin of California admitted that his marriage to wealthy heiress Jennifer Park had been arranged by their families for mutual political and financial benefit, with Blackstone helping them create a romantic origin story about meeting at a charity gala. "We've been married for 15 years and we're good friends," Chin told investigators. "But we've never been romantically involved. The whole love story was created by consultants to make our arrangement more palatable to voters." Governor Elizabeth Warren of Maine, no relation to the senator, revealed that she had paid her husband $2.3 million over the course of their marriage to maintain the appearance of a stable family life while she pursued increasingly high-profile political offices. David didn't want to be in politics, she explained in her immunity agreement. He's a private person who wanted to focus on his art. So we worked out a financial arrangement that compensated him for the time and privacy he sacrificed for my career. Each revelation added another layer to the public's understanding of how systematically political families had been manufacturing authenticity for electoral purposes. But the most significant discovery came when investigators obtained access to the encrypted communications of Meridian Strategy Group, a firm that had specialized in what internal documents called extreme relationship management for political clients facing existential threats to their careers. The Meridian files contained evidence of what investigators termed emergency marriage protocols, systematic plans for creating fake marriages, adoptions, and family relationships when political careers required specific demographic or emotional appeals. Senator Thomas Mitchell of Georgia had used Meridian services to arrange a fake marriage with an African-American woman to improve his standing with black voters, paying her $5 million over 4 years to play the role of loving wife while maintaining separate residences and completely separate personal lives. Congressman Maria Rodriguez of Texas had worked with Meridian to adopt 3 children from different ethnic backgrounds, not for family reasons, but to create what internal documents called maximum demographic appeal for her congressional campaigns. These weren't families, explained FBI agent Lisa Wong, who had led the Meridian investigation. These were political props created to manipulate voter emotions and perceptions. The children were essentially campaign accessories. The Meridian revelations triggered a national conversation about the ethics of using family relationships as political tools, with child welfare advocates calling for investigations into the psychological impact on children who had been adopted or born into purely transactional family arrangements. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a child psychologist at Johns Hopkins University, testified before Congress about the psychological damage caused by children growing up in families where relationships were performed rather than felt. These children often develop severe attachment disorders, she explained. They learn that love is conditional on performance, that relationships are transactional, that authentic emotion is dangerous because it interferes with the roles they're expected to play. Her testimony included case studies of children from political families who had required extensive therapy to recover from what she termed performance family trauma, the psychological damage caused by growing up in households where every interaction was choreographed for public consumption. The child welfare implications added another dimension to the political marriage scandal, transforming it from a question of electoral fraud into a matter of institutional child abuse enabled by political ambition. Congressional investigators discovered that Meridian Strategy Group had maintained detailed psychological profiles of children in their client families, monitoring their emotional development to ensure they could maintain their assigned roles without psychological breakdown that might expose the artificial nature of their families. We tracked behavioral indicators that might suggest a child was struggling with the performance requirements, admitted Dr. Rachel Foster, Meridian's former chief psychologist, during her immunity testimony. If a child showed signs of rebellion against their assigned family role, we provided intervention strategies to maintain family cohesion. The intervention strategies included financial incentives for older children, social isolation from peers who might encourage authenticity, and in extreme cases, temporary removal from the family home during adjustment periods. These weren't families, Foster acknowledged under intense questioning from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They were political theater companies with children as unwilling performers. The systematic abuse of children for political purposes triggered the largest federal investigation into political corruption in American history, with over 200 current and former political figures across both parties facing potential charges related to election fraud, tax evasion, child endangerment, and conspiracy to defraud the American people. The investigation revealed that the political marriage industry had generated over $2.8 billion in revenue over 3 decades, with wealthy political figures paying extraordinary amounts to create and maintain fake family relationships for electoral advantage. But perhaps most shocking was the discovery of what investigators called the breeding programs, systematic arrangements where political figures paid women to bear children for them while maintaining fake romantic relationships for public consumption. Each revelation added another layer to the public's understanding of how systematically political families had been manufacturing authenticity for electoral purposes. But the most significant discovery came when investigators obtained access to the encrypted communications of Meridian Strategy Group, a firm that had specialized in what internal documents called extreme relationship management for political clients facing existential threats to their careers. The Meridian files contained evidence of what investigators termed emergency marriage protocols, systematic plans for creating fake marriages, adoptions, and family relationships when political careers required specific demographic or emotional appeals. Senator Thomas Mitchell of Georgia had used Meridian services to arrange a fake marriage with an African-American woman to improve his standing with black voters, paying her $5 million over 4 years to play the role of loving wife while maintaining separate residences and completely separate personal lives. Congressman Maria Rodriguez of Texas had worked with Meridian to adopt 3 children from different ethnic backgrounds, not for family reasons, but to create what internal documents called maximum demographic appeal for her congressional campaigns. These weren't families, explained FBI agent Lisa Wong, who had led the Meridian investigation. These were political props created to manipulate voter emotions and perceptions. The children were essentially campaign accessories. The Meridian revelations triggered a national conversation about the ethics of using family relationships as political tools, with child welfare advocates calling for investigations into the psychological impact on children who had been adopted or born into purely transactional family arrangements. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a child psychologist at Johns Hopkins University, testified before Congress about the psychological damage caused by children growing up in families where relationships were performed rather than felt. These children often develop severe attachment disorders, she explained. They learn that love is conditional on performance, that relationships are transactional, that authentic emotion is dangerous because it interferes with the roles they're expected to play. Her testimony included case studies of children from political families who had required extensive therapy to recover from what she termed performance family trauma, the psychological damage caused by growing up in households where every interaction was choreographed for public consumption. The child welfare implications added another dimension to the political marriage scandal, transforming it from a question of electoral fraud into a matter of institutional child abuse enabled by political ambition. Congressional investigators discovered that Meridian Strategy Group had maintained detailed psychological profiles of children in their client families, monitoring their emotional development to ensure they could maintain their assigned roles without psychological breakdown that might expose the artificial nature of their families. We tracked behavioral indicators that might suggest a child was struggling with the performance requirements, admitted Dr. Rachel Foster, Meridian's former chief psychologist, during her immunity testimony. If a child showed signs of rebellion against their assigned family role, we provided intervention strategies to maintain family cohesion. The intervention strategies included financial incentives for older children, social isolation from peers who might encourage authenticity, and in extreme cases, temporary removal from the family home during adjustment periods. These weren't families, Foster acknowledged under intense questioning from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They were political theater companies with children as unwilling performers. The systematic abuse of children for political purposes triggered the largest federal investigation into political corruption in American history, with over 200 current and former political figures across both parties facing potential charges related to election fraud, tax evasion, child endangerment, and conspiracy to defraud the American people. The investigation revealed that the political marriage industry had generated over $2.8 billion in revenue over 3 decades, with wealthy political figures paying extraordinary amounts to create and maintain fake family relationships for electoral advantage. But perhaps most shocking was the discovery of what investigators called the breeding programs, systematic arrangements where political figures paid women to bear children for them while maintaining fake romantic relationships for public consumption. Children who had been forced to perform inauthentic roles in political families received counseling, legal protection, and in many cases, financial compensation for the psychological damage they had suffered. The women who had been paid to play the roles of political wives were recognized as victims of systematic exploitation, with many receiving immunity from prosecution in exchange for testimony that helped prosecute the political figures who had purchased their services. Perhaps most importantly, the American people had learned to distinguish between authentic human relationships and the carefully constructed performances that had masqueraded as family values for decades. Political candidates were now required to present their families with honest acknowledgement of imperfections, struggles, and the genuine costs of political life, rather than impossible narratives of perfect relationships that served no one except campaign consultants. The transformation wasn't complete. No human institution ever achieves perfection, but it represented a fundamental shift toward honesty about the most basic human relationships that democracy requires from its leaders. Jasmine Crockett, whose 37 seconds of questioning had triggered the avalanche of truth that reshaped American politics, reflected on the transformation during a keynote address at the National Press Club 5 years later. The Melania-Trump marriage contract wasn't just about one fake relationship, she told an audience of journalists who had covered every twist and turn of the political authenticity revolution. It was about a systematic corruption of truth that had infected our entire political culture. She paused, her words carrying the weight of institutional change. Americans deserve leaders whose personal relationships are as genuine as the policies they advocate. They deserve families who model the authentic human connections that democracy requires. And they deserve the truth about the people they choose to entrust with their government. The audience applauded not just for the political victory, but for the cultural transformation that had made American politics more honest, more human, and more trustworthy than it had been in generations. The greatest fake marriage in political history had ultimately created the most authentic political culture in American history. And sometimes that's exactly what democracy needs. A scandal so profound that it forces an entire system to confront its deepest deceptions and choose truth over convenience. 37 seconds had changed everything. And in the end, everything needed to be changed.